All right, hello. My name is Ted Pavlik. I'm a faculty member in the School of Life Sciences, and this is Animal Behavior, Bio 331. Animal behavior is a very exciting topic for me. It's the thing that got me interested in biology in general. So it's kind of cool to be here with you talking about it. And so, but today we're going to talk a little bit about behavior, but mostly about the class and the policies. And so we should be able to get out early today. I know it's kind of a drag being this late in the day. It's just how it turned out. But the big thing here is to check the syllabus on Canvas. There's a lot of info there. I've tried to make it pretty complete. And just Canvas in general complements that. This is the first time I've taught 331, so I'm building out the Canvas course as we go. So I've got all the units there, but I still have to populate all of the assignments and build all of those assignments. So things are a little sparse right now, but all of the course policy work is there. I also want to introduce you to Anushka Dasgupta, who is a graduate student in animal behavior and will be the TA for the course. And so she'll be a great resource to come to for help. So she'll be hanging out here in classes, and then also we'll hold office hours. And you can find her information on Canvas as well under the instructional staff page. So let's, when you go to Canvas, like the main areas that you're going to focus on for this course is I put basically everything organized under modules. And so when you go to our Canvas page, the syllabus page opens up first, but then modules is kind of where everything's stored in it. If for some reason it's easier for you to get to a particular assignment directly rather than looking for it interdigitated inside all of the different units, then assignments is also fine. And assignments helps also remember things like the drop policies on different assignment categories and things like that. But pretty much everything in assignments is also in modules. And of course, grades. So I am not one of those faculty member who keeps an Excel spreadsheet and comes up with all sorts of mysterious formulas that you have to email 5 times throughout the semester just to figure out what's going on. I just grade as simple as I can that allows Canvas to do it for me. So your estimate of your grade inside the grade book in Canvas is going to be the closest thing to anything I can give you. And one of the nice things about that is there's some things that are hard for me to do. Like if you'd say, well, what grade do I need on the midterm for a particular outcome? It's more difficult for me to do, but in Canvas, you can go into the grade book, and if you've never done this before, you can click on a grade that you haven't received yet and put in a hypothetical grade, and it'll recalculate based on that. So the Canvas gradebook, I think, is a good resource, and that will be where you find most of that info. And then, of course, again, the syllabus page there. So just to kind of drill down into that a little bit more, there are a lot of things in the modules, and so what I would recommend you do the first time you go into this is when you go into modules, hit collapse all to collapse all of these module sections down. And that'll make it a little easier to navigate because, like, for example, this course information, policies, and student resources, you might only need this week. You very rarely need that one. But, some of the other unit stuff down here, that will be things that you'll need later. And so collapse all is your friend. And then the way things are organized is the sections, the modules up at the top are all the kind of course information. And so the syllabus and some other things are going to be up here in this module. The textbook, the Breed and More textbook, you can get a physical copy, but our library has an electronic copy you can access for free that's linked from inside here. So you shouldn't need to buy that text unless you want to hold that physical textbook in your hand. And then classroom recordings, I'm going to do my best to record all of the lectures and post them afterwards so that if there's any clarifying things, you can find them there, and they're stored underneath there. And then otherwise, there is this Unit 0, which has 2 very easy assignments. They'll be very quick. They're basically a syllabus assignment. They go over stuff that I talk about today and some additional things in the syllabus. You'll need to complete all of those items to get access to all of these modules for the rest of the course. And so that technically is due, so it'll show up on your Canvas calendar like, I don't know, Sunday or something, but there's no like late penalty or whatever. It's available all semester because you need to complete it and get 100% on it in order to, you can retake it in order to get access to the rest of the course. That's the other thing is I'm going to try to make sure that on all assignments, I'll populate all of the availability dates, all of the due dates, so that your Canvas calendar should be a pretty accurate snapshot of what is expected for this course. So that's something else to look for there. And then, so I often get a question about honors contracts. If you drill down into this module here, there is a page that I put together on honors contracts, potential honors contracts, the process for that. So if you're interested in an honors contract, read through that first, and then after you read through that, then feel free to reach out to me, based on what you see in there. Okay, so otherwise, this is we meet twice a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays at this time. There is, there's me and Anushka are the two instructional staff for this course. And then our student support hours will be posted in that document there. I have become kind of a fan of Zoom-based office hours because they're sometimes difficult to get into the two buildings that I spend most of my time into, but I'm happy to meet in person if that doesn't work out. But otherwise, I'm definitely happy to meet by Zoom. That's usually my kind of default. So if I'm sitting in office hours, I usually have my Zoom up as well. So that's another entry point. If you send me email or Anushka email, then please put Bio 331 in the subject. I teach other courses, and it becomes difficult if you email me and you say, I'm going to be absent on a certain day or something like that, and you want to let me know about that. I have to manually go through all the rosters to figure out what course you're in. So it's just really helpful for you to put that in the subject. And the other thing is, with all the other email that I get, because I only get paid to teach 40% of the week, that a lot of those emails get buried. But if you put the subject in there, a filter will make sure that it gets highlighted and brought to my attention much more quickly. So please, please, please put that in the subject line of your email if you email me. And then it'd be great if then you also get a brief description of what you're looking for so I know how urgent it is. If that's not something you're interested in doing, then we have a Slack for this, Slack workspace for this class. Happy to use it. You can DM me on Slack, or you can post questions into the Slack, and both me and Anushka will take a look at those and try to answer those. And so those are fine ways to reach out. All right, so animal behavior. What are we talking about with animal behavior? So this is a behavior called stotting. Has anyone heard of stotting before? Okay, so you notice this, let's see if I can go back and get it to restart here. Let's go back and forward. A lot of ungulates do this. When they run away from a predator, instead of running like this, they will start hopping on all fours, which doesn't seem very efficient. And they point all their legs down like this as they do that. Does anybody have any thoughts about that? Like why might a wide range of ungulates do that? Yeah. It, you might think it's to run faster, but if you do some sort of tests on this, they actually are a lot slower when they're stotting than when they're trotting. On the other hand, yeah. Communicate which, sorry? That's interesting. So vigilance, so that's a hypothesis here that maybe they've seen a predator, and this is a way to visually communicate to others that don't see the predator that there is a predator nearby, because that's such a weird behavior that you would never do that normally. So that's kind of like an alarm call, but it's like a visual alarm call. That's a very interesting hypothesis. Anybody else have any other ideas? Yeah. Makes them seem bigger is another one. So that's another idea that maybe if the predator sees this thing that's hopping around, the predator will think, whoa, that thing is actually pretty dangerous. Maybe there's no way that I'm gonna to win this fight. So something on that. Yeah, back in the back. Oh, I see. So you're saying that there are multiple ones here, or back. That's very interesting. So it could actually be intraspecific communication where we already mentioned that one of them could be about alerting, but the other one might be somehow demonstrating to another conspecific that demonstrating something. So that's another interesting hypothesis. Anybody else? Yeah. So it's some sort of defense maneuver. So maybe there's some way that if the predator comes by, that this is a way that the predators probably can't jump that high. Maybe it can jump on top of the predator. That's very reasonable too. Anybody else? Yeah. So maybe it's energetically more efficient to run this way. So even though it might slow them down in a short run, so to speak, it allows them to run for longer. It's like, yeah. So that's another interesting idea. Anybody else? Yeah. Pounce, I don't know, something, yeah. Stop. Oh, interesting. So it sort of is a primer for some other behavior that we haven't observed that would allow it to, access to this additional behavior that allows it to get away. That's kind of a cool idea too. Anybody else? You guys are very active. This is very cool. Yeah. So it could just be some expression of excitement or what the animal's feeling. So it's not necessarily, we haven't hypothesized about a potential function, but we're sort of suggesting that it's just sort of this mechanistic outcome that when the animal is feeling this way, then it ends up presenting this particular behavior. Similarly, that, just like if I'm feeling hot, I mean, you might see me sweat. We don't necessarily know what the sweat is for. That's another sort of, so there's this kind of mechanistic question of, from hot to sweat, but then there's the functional question of from sweat to cool. So, so in this case, rather than us talking about the function, we can talk about the mechanism. Yeah. That's another very interesting idea, a functional idea that maybe that along this kind of snowy ground, maybe back here it's not as much snowy, but in the snow, you're not quite sure what's underneath there. So it's kind of like I have some colleagues that uh, will do field work at Yosemite. And at Yosemite, you can't do any science there. There's just a rule, there's a law that says you can't be out in the, or I guess not a law, but there's a rule there that they won't let you do any experiments there that are within view of the public. And so you're often in these like areas that are all hidden away. And there's a bunch of these areas that actually are very brittle that if you were to step on, you could fall through. And very often you find bison-sized holes in the ground with like, just, acids and all sorts of interesting caustic soups underneath that have digested away this poor bison at one point in time. So the people I know who work there, they often look for bison footprints because that gives you certainty that if a bison hasn't fallen through, then I probably won't. And there could be something similar where you don't know what's under the snow, and maybe you're just kind of tiptoeing through the outside here. I think that's another interesting functional idea. Anybody else? Yeah. Mm. Hmm. Sure. Has anybody seen Dune or know about Dune? The sandworms and the walking in the sort of strange ways. Maybe there's something like that going on here where you're trying to that it's not that they saw the predator, but it's that they're trying to prevent from being detected, and maybe the predator is really in tune to a normal trot, you know, um, and so on. Anybody else have anything else burning they want to offer? Yeah. Pardon me? playfulness. Yeah, that kind of goes along with the expression, the kind of this like it's just sort of an expression of like maybe it's a social thing, maybe it's trying to get the other, in this case, deer to play with it. Maybe it's just sort of excited, and that's how it expresses itself. Again, maybe it's more mechanistic. Sure. I think all of these have been fantastic, and you could imagine the next step would be to test them. And so you could say, so like let's say that we're saying that this is for prevention of being detected by a predator. Well, how might we tell the difference between something that is for prevention or in response to a predator? How might we disentangle those two hypotheses, that this is for escaping a predator or preventing from being detected through observation? What sort of experiment could we set up, or what sort of observations could we do that might suggest different outcomes for those two different hypotheses? Anybody have an idea for that? Yeah. Right. So like that would be, so it sounds like we're proposing an interesting experiment there where let's observe. We know sometimes we see predators and sometimes we see prey. So whenever we see predators, we can kind of imagine, is there a sequence of events where once the predator is very close to the prey, does the prey then go stotting off? Or does the prey go stotting off when there's no predator around? And you might expect, well, if it's a response to a predator, then I would predict that when the predator gets close to the prey, it will start off. But if it is to prevent a predator from detecting it, then maybe a predator might be very far off and it'll start stotting. But if it's very close to the predator, it might just run. That might be, you have to make an argument that those two different hypotheses for the same observation would lead to two different predictions. And we could do that for all of these ones. All of these are great hypotheses, and they're still people don't completely understand where stotting comes from. But I'll let you in on the lead hypothesis here in just a second. But for each one of those are perfectly reasonable explanations for why or how. So ultimate or approximate, those are two terms we're going to use a lot this semester. So what is the function or what is the mechanism behind stotting? And we could test them in a bunch of different ways, rejecting some hypotheses, failing to reject others. And over all of these different tests, then we would end up getting an interesting explanatory narrative. And people have started to do that. And there is a communication explanation that seems to be the leading contender for explaining how this behavior or why this behavior is maintained across so many of these prey animals. And this, I'm not saying this is right, but this is the one that has been stood up so far to a bunch of these other tests. Now, what I'm about to tell you is what I'm going to call a functional hypothesis. It is not a mechanistic hypothesis. And so exactly how this ungulate achieves this height, that is a totally different question that exists separate from the why question of why did this evolve? And those two can coexist, and we don't want to confound those two. So when we do a study, we specifically know that our study is about the mechanism, or it's about the function, or it's about the evolution, or it's about the development. And that's what we're going to learn about next week as Timbergen's 4. And all of these hypotheses that you guys just talked about fit in to those 4 different bins. We may have didn't hear a lot about the development, but kind of got there a little bit. So the leading hypothesis for why stotting exists has to do with something called the handicap principle. Has anyone heard of the handicap principle? It's fine if not, you're supposed to hear about it in this class. Okay, so the handicap principle is this idea that if you have something that is definitely a handicap, and yet that strategy persists, then it is an honest signal that you got something else going for you. Stotting slows down these prey, but they're still very fast. And so it is thought that stotting is a signal. So we're going to talk later in the semester about the difference between cues and signals. And a signal is a message that is beneficial for both the sender and the receiver. In this case, the sender is the ungulate, the receiver is the predator. And the prey does not want to be eaten. The predator does not want to go into a costly pursuit that it probably won't be able to win. So if a predator sees this stotting, then that, on an evolutionary timescale, will say that predators that go after stotting animals will end up just using up a bunch of energy and might get closer to starvation. And predators that avoid stotting animals will end up going after prey that they're actually likely to eat. So it's not that a predator is doing a calculation in their head, oh, that's a stotting animal, I should probably not go after that, because if it manages to be able to stot and still be around and no other predators have gotten it, then there's no way I'm going to get it. That logic is not going on in the predator's head, it's going on over evolutionary timescale, where you've got predators that went after stotters and predators that didn't go after stotters. The predators that didn't go after stotters survived. The predators that did go after stotters died. And all you were left with was the predator that could recognize this stotting. Now, there's all sorts of interesting questions we can ask about how mechanism does a predator recognize stotting? Like, what is it about the stotting that is the informative thing? Like is it looking at this curvature? Is it looking at something else? And so on and so forth. So there's all sorts of other questions that come up, with that for both the sender and the receiver. But the leading explanation for this is that the reason why we see it in so many ungulates is that there was an ancestral ungulate that figured out this strategy, and it's worked so well that it's been kept in all of these other four-legged animals that descended from that one. That's the kind of story there. Any questions about that basic explanation? By the way, you're not supposed to get all of that right now. That's the type of thing that by the end of this semester, I want you to be able to look at a behavior like this. Like, you're going to just go outside and see, wow, that rock dove, that that ant, that ground squirrel is doing a really weird pattern of things, but consistently. I wonder what that's all about. And that will lead to causal questions, which will lead to hypotheses, which will lead to experiments and predictions and so on and so forth, a lot like what happened just here. So this is the type of process I want you to get to by the end of this semester. But with that in mind, are there any questions about this narrative that I just told? Now notice it's a narrative I told. So that's another thing we're going to look out for in this semester, is how well supported these hypotheses are. Because we have a such thing called a just so story, where we can say that is a really interesting adaptive story for why this behavior seems to be around. It just seems to fit just so. But in the end, after you kind of drill down into it and start testing other things, then you find out that it was kind of a cute story, but it actually doesn't hold up. And that's why we don't want to start, saying the reason why stotting exists is this until we've had, tested a bunch of other possible things. And then all we're left with is, yeah, well, it seems to be an honest signal. We know that the prey does slow down, but it doesn't slow down that much, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's stotting. That's what we're doing this semester. That's what we're setting up. That's the tools that I'm going to give you. Both Anushka and I work on behavior. We work on ants. Anushka used to work on wasps. I used to work on fish and birds, gray jays. And a lot of what we do is we look for patterns like this and start asking these questions and bringing up all of these hypotheses and then figuring out how are we going to disentangle her hypothesis from his hypothesis and so on and so forth. That is behavioral ecology. And that is also what we're introducing in this class, not just animal behavior and how you observe behavior, but how do you make sense of it in an evolutionary framework with experiments and so on and so forth. Okay. So how do we do that? So this is a bunch of text that is basically just kind of copied from the syllabus. I'm just putting it up here just to be complete. But basically, you're going to see a wide range of natural history examples. And so I got an email about this course over the summer to ask how human focused it would be, because sometimes we kind of pull a fast one on you, like Bio 360, animal physiology, it's all human, right? Like it's all vertebrate. And by vertebrate, it's like, well, there's one vertebrate you really care about. So it's boring and it's dull, at least to an organismal biologist like me. 360 seems like a waste of time. But this is not a human-based class. This is a class about the diversity of different organisms and their behaviors that are out there. Humans are a part of that, and we certainly can talk about humans and how they relate and how they fit in and so on and so forth. But this isn't meant to be just a model organism for some human thing. This is really meant to be, here's a problem that has been solved in a gazillion different ways across the tree of life. What's going on there? Where does that diversity come from? So we're going to see a wide range of natural history. We are going to talk about how behavioral scientists design experiments and a little bit, not much, of mathematical models to make sense of these observations. So we'll see that. And then from those experiments, we generate data. And so then we're going to look at the data that comes out of behavioral experiments and see how do we make sense of this often very noisy data. That's the one thing about behavior as compared to molecular work, cellular work, is that there's a huge amount of noise. So that your R squared value is usually very low. So you can't explain all of the variance. And so at what point have you explained enough? That's kind of like what we'll talk about here. And then, how we do that, again, I'm not going to go through all this. You can read this right off the syllabus, but these are the things that we're hopefully going to tick off as we go through the semester. And so this will hopefully be a way for you to pull together other courses so that we can talk about how ecology, genetics, G by E, genetic gene environment, gene by environment interactions that produce phenotype, and evolution more broadly. This will be a way to practice all of those things. So how are we going to organize that? Well, we've got the first part of the course is kind of the foundations and the conceptual frameworks of animal behavior. So we'll introduce animal behavior next week. We'll talk about behavioral genetics, learning and cognition, and then communication. So these are just sort of the fundamentals that could be applied to most behaviors. We'll have a midterm over these units here. And it's a two-stage exam. I'll talk about what that means here in a second. We come back from the midterm, and then we start drilling down into a little more specifics, the kind of juicier stuff of animal behavior, like movement, foraging, self-defense, mating, territoriality, and parenting, and then ending with social behavior. Now, there is a group project that takes the place of a second midterm that there's the final chapter in our course text, which is by Breed and Moore. Mike Breed, by the way, was the advisor of Jennifer Fuel, who's a faculty here at ASU. And in that Breed chapter that last chapter is all about conservation and behavior. And so kind of thinking about conservation biology through a behavioral lens. And that is what motivates this. So we're not going to talk about that explicitly in class, but that is going to motivate this sort of group project where in groups of 3 or 4, well, I'll talk about this here in a second in detail, but basically we're going to form small groups where you're going to find a behavior that is out in Phoenix somewhere that hypothetically might be being affected by some anthropogenic cause. So maybe a wall that's being built, maybe it's a sidewalk that's gone through, maybe it's an increase in temperature due to climate change, and so on and so forth. And you will then propose a hypothesis and try to tell me what type of a hypothesis it is. We'll learn about the types next week, and then propose an experiment to test for that, and then bundle that all up into a presentation that you'll give to a potential funder that would say, this is why we think we need to put money into studying this to see if there's this impact that's affecting the behavior of these animals in this particular way. So that's what we'll be doing, again, instead of a second midterm. And then we'll have a final exam that is technically cumulative, but it's mostly going to be over these examples here. But because those are fundamentals, they kind of get folded into a lot of these things. So that's kind of the basic layout of how the course will flow. And then this is another kind of fundamental of animal behavior here. These things here often come from what are called by behaviorists as the 4 F's of animal behavior. And so they are foraging, fighting. So, we've seen that fighting, there's some potential hypotheses about intraspecific. Fleeing, so stotting was all about fleeing. And the 4th F, reproduction. So a lot of mating stuff in here as well. So we see these will come up over and over again as we start talking about animal behavior. The textbook we'll use, Breed and More. Again, see Canvas for links to, I absolutely, it's a fine textbook if you want to get it, but otherwise there is an electronic version that the ASU library makes available to you. So you should have access to it for this course. Prereqs for this course, we're going to try to build everything off of what you've learned in 181 and 182. Question? Send me a screenshot of that so that I can then ask the library. I accessed it from you can also try maybe going through the library directly. I know I was accessing it last night and it seemed to work. So we'll get that sorted. If for some reason it doesn't work, I have contingency plans. So, but I'd like to not resort to them if I don't have to. Yeah. You in theory, it should be available from the library. It has been. Now, what might have happened is I added it to so down the left-hand side of the Canvas site, there's a library, like an ASU library link, and I added it to a list of resources that I wanted to be associated with this course, and it's currently processing. It's possible that even though it's an ebook, because it's processing, it's put on some sort of weird temporary hold before they approve it, because they have to, hold a certain number of electronic licenses or something like that. Hopefully that'll get resolved, and I'll, find. It turns out that it's not critical that I'm not actually going to quiz you on this material, but I've crafted the course to pair with chapters from Breed and More so that it will be very helpful for you to have access to this text. Yeah, in the pink first. Uh-huh. All right, great. So that's news. So I will do my best to fix the link in the modules, but if worse comes to worst, maybe I'll just put a note in the modules to just use the ASU library link in the nav bar down the left-hand side of Canvas. And then from there, you should find the book, and hopefully it'll be available for you there. Any other questions? Thank you for looking into that as we're doing this. There are a ton of other animal behavior books. John Alcock, who used to be professor here, wrote the book in animal behavior. He died a few years ago, and Dustin Rubenstein kind of took over for that. That's a very common textbook that's used there. It's just not as available, which is why I kind of went with this one. But if you're interested in this topic, there's a ton of great resources on animal behavior out there. So along with that, in the Canvas site, in the modules, and then later when you open these and then the lectures, I tried to put in, by the lectures, I'll do this too, but I tried to put in square brackets the chapters out of the Breed and More that are related to the topics that I'm covering here. So that if you're looking for more examples, follow-up or whatever, then you know kind of where to look. So that's what those square brackets are all about there. I would like you to be reading along, but again, I'm not going to quiz you specifically on the book. I'll talk about the assessments and how that works here in just a second. So the assessments here, so I'm not going to worry about iClicker today, but make sure that you've accessed your iClicker account. And if Bio 331 didn't automatically show up, I put a join link in the announcement. So join it so that you can make sure to get in there so that we can start doing the iClicker next week. But so basically, throughout the lecture, I will ask some questions, and then I'll ask you to respond to them. I might in the case where there are correct answers, I might show those correct or talk about the correct answers, but I'm not looking for correct answers for you for your participation. I'm just looking for completeness. So if I ask 5 questions and you answer a certain number of them, then you'll get your point for that day. But there is a drop policy. So it's in the syllabus. I think I'm dropping 5. So, if you can't come to class a couple of times, not a big deal. It's also not a huge portion of your grade given how many classes there are. But look at that drop policy. There's also a healthy drop policy on these comprehension exercises and applied reading. So basically at the end of every unit, so there's about 10 units, there I'm going to have a short Canvas-based exercise where it's going to be a mostly auto-graded assessment that will go over topics from that unit that will help give you feedback on how well you've understood the material from that unit. Again, the drop policy there's going to be like 10 of them, and I think I'm dropping 5. So it's a pretty healthy drop policy. It's easy to miss. I will think no less of you if you decide to take all those drops. So use the drops, use that flexibility in your schedules. I'm not expecting you to do all of them, but you certainly can do all of them. They're provided there as an opportunity. Now I've got these applied reading assignments using Perusal. This is a tool that I really enjoy using in my other classes. What I'm going to do at the end of every unit is I'm going to look at the Breed and Moore book and take one of their examples, and I'm going to find one paper, one primary source that Breed and Moore references, an animal behavior paper, and I'm going to throw it up on Perusal. And Perusal, if you've never used it before, how many people have used Perusal? So there's a fair amount. It's still kind of sparse. You'll open it up in Perusal, and you'll read that paper, and you'll have to make little comments on the paper. So you say, oh, this section is interesting to me, or you'll see other people's comments and you can respond to those. It uses an AI algorithm to sort of see how engaged you are, and then it gives you a score from like 0 to 3. And then so then that will end up being the score that goes into Canvas. And then I'll also kind of comment on that. Question? It's a very complex rubric and weighting, and there's trade-offs. So like if you spend more time on the page, then you don't need to answer as many questions or pose. So and they tell us not to tell you how we've configured it to sort of, because the mystery is part of the exercise. But even in the defaults, there's a bunch of different ways you can score those points. Responding to others, adding, just reading back and forth, going through the whole document. There's all different ways to score these types of points. But there's a drop policy on these. I think right now I have you dropping the lowest 2 of these assignments here, so you don't have to do all of them. But because I've anchored them to the Breed book, then what's a good idea is in the Breed chapter to like go into the index or whatever and figure out where in the Breed chapter they talk about that particular paper. And then that will give you a nice summary, Breed's kind of like, high level explanation of why that paper is significant. And then that might be useful before you're reading it to kind of focus things. And so that's where this is supposed to sort of tie in with the textbook reading. And I'm not going to quiz you directly on the text, but I'm hoping the text will help support reading primary sources, because your biology majors mostly, you should have access to primary sources. That's one of your strengths relative to a lot of the other disciplines, is that you potentially come out of your undergrad having learned how to read critically from scientific literature. And so that's where I'm trying to get you to practice here. So then the other, any questions about those? Those are kind of the easy grading things. Okay. So then the other things, the bigger things that culminate in the middle and the end of the semester is, like I said, this conservation biology behavior pitch project. It technically adds up to 30% of the grade, but that's broken down, and there's a lot of really easy points here. So you have to form a group. So basically, there'll be a 5% assignment where every individual will say, these are the other 3 individuals in my group. And as long as you all match up, then that's it. That's all I need. So then that's done. And then this is supposed to have an extra O in there, but then you'll submit a short assignment where you're basically saying, hey, our group has decided that we're going to study these wasps that we found on the corner of this particular street that seem to be under this overhang, and they seem to be benefiting from, I don't know, there's like a moisture thing going on, and we're kind of interested in that. And so you don't have to work it all out, but you got to sort of say, this is the thing that we've observed. We're going to kind of take observations, and that'll be our justification. And then we're going to work through these hypotheses and a potential experiment to propose. You're not doing the experiment, you're just proposing the experiment. So, and then you put all of that together, and then in the last week of class, then your group will end up presenting this again like a pitch as a video presentation. So we're not going to do them up in front of class. You're going to upload the video to Canvas on the Wednesday of the week before finals week. And the reason to do it in the middle of finals week is that I want to then, because then once they're all uploaded, every individual will get a randomly assigned presentation from another group to watch and peer review. And so I'll give you a rubric, and I'll ask you to write some comments, and then you'll score points for just doing the peer review. So, so basically these three categories at like 15% is mostly gimme. This organism selection is mainly an opportunity for me to give you feedback on that sounds good or that sounds bad. And if it doesn't sound, or if it sounds bad, then I'm not going to just dock you points. I'm going to say, hey, can you try something else? And then that's how you'll get your points. And then, so really the meat of this is this 15% group presentation, this video presentation. No report to submit or anything like that. I like these presentations when they're uploaded to Canvas. Ideally, unless people have a problem with it, I'm probably going to have them uploaded to discussions so that although you're randomly assigned one to watch, if you're really interested, you could actually watch more than that. You just won't peer review them. All right, so any questions about this? Well, when we get after the midterm, we'll get into more detail about this stuff. But this is just kind of a heads up that this is coming. Yeah. I don't want to bias things too much. I'm hoping that but I think you could definitely come to me and Anushka. We're, we're kind of have acquired the kind of nerdy eye for these things, and sort of say like, well, where do you kind of go, around Tempe most of the time? Have you noticed this? Have you noticed that? And then kind of, hopefully find something that's convenient for you and interesting for you as well. So certainly, like, you should like bring it up. We can kind of help with that. Again, I don't want to give you a list of all of these things because part of the fun of it is like seeing what you come up with. But like the obvious things are like grackles, like there's grackles everywhere. Honeybees. These things that you see all the time. But it's really cool if you find something that you don't often see, and it's actually kind of weird that you see it where it is. Like for example, black widows. Black widows, if you go out on a night hike or a day hike, I guess, in the middle of the desert, it's hard to find them. They're not very, you don't see them very often. But in the city, they're everywhere. And so there are these interesting urban effects that cause black widows to be, spaced very close together. And so, what's going on with that? And that happens actually with a lot of invertebrate life and actually vertebrate life too, that these weird urban effects. And so, those are types of things where once we kind of learn about the four, there's a bunch of aspects of behavior so that you could potentially get into. It may not be, something as conspicuous as the stotting. It may be that, it looks like there's a developmental issue going on here, or there's a learning problem going on here, and so on and so forth. Any other questions? Again, we can go into this in more detail after the midterm. Okay. So then the other thing, speaking of exams, this midterm and this final, how many people have taken a two-stage exam before? Okay. In college or in high school? How many people have taken two-stage in college? Okay. It used to be that you saw them more in high school, and I started doing this a few years ago, and I've gotten a lot of positive feedback on it. So I just like to do it more and more. So the idea here is you've got these two exams, and part of the reason you have two exams is because the two-stage kills a lot of time. The way I do it here, but so every exam is going to take up 2 lecture periods. So there'll be one lecture period is the individual period where you will take the exam on your own, closed book, closed notes. I'll give you a sheet of paper, with notes on it if you'd like, and you take that exam and submit it. And then you don't get your score. You don't get to find out what the right answers are. A couple of days later, like the next lecture period, you take the exact same exam again, but you can work with whoever you want to work with, and you can just work audibly. You can, you sort of identify collectively what are the hardest problems, what are the easiest problems, what are the answers, those sorts of things, and you'll submit both of those tests, and your score for the exam will be 80% individual, 20% group. Now, on top of that, I'm good. They're going to be auto-graded exams administered on Canvas. And so I will be here, or if worst comes to worst, I'll make Anushka be here. But at least I will try to be here during these exam periods so that if you want to come to class, you can. But because they're Canvas-based, I'm going to allow you to take them anywhere at any time during those 2 days. So you don't have to come to class that day. Once for the individual one, we'll use lockdown to make it easier. So once you start, a timer will start, and you'll have to take it within that a certain amount of time. But for the stage 2, there'll be no timers or anything. You can just keep revisiting it all day. And that's how the stage 2 is in. So we'll do the same thing with a final. So the Thursday, the week before finals week, will be stage 1, and then the day of finals week will be stage 2. And I'll even give you a couple of days during finals week so that, since this is a late class on Tuesday, Thursdays, our final day is like Thursday. I will be here for that on that Thursday, but you don't have to be. I'll actually give you extra time that week so that if you want to get your stage 2 done on Monday and just be done with it, then that's fine. Question? No, I mean, so I'll give a little extra time than 75 minutes to account for technical problems, but there won't be sort of an easy way to get a hold of me because, again, I'll give you any time during that day. Any other questions about this 2-stage exam? Okay. All right. Other things, late policy. So basically, I do use the due dates and the availability windows. The way I use the availability windows on Canvas is like I'll set a due date to get it on your Canvas calendar. But as long as you get the assignment in, if Canvas allows you to submit the assignment, in other words, if the availability window hasn't closed, you get full credit, no late policy or whatever. So there's a natural grace period. So usually I make things due at 11:59, but I make them available until 10 a.m. the next morning. So if you submit it at like 12:01 and Canvas lets you submit it, you don't have to email me and say, oh no, something happened. I thought I was submitting it this way. Don't worry about any of that. As long as it's in, then it'll be graded the same way. The only exception to that is this group project assignment that you have to submit Wednesday, the week before finals week, because I have to make it available the way that peer reviews work. So I can't close the availability window, but I really do need it in so that I can randomly assign it to different to all of the students to do the peer reviews. So that's the only one that I really need it in by the due date. But even then, I can be a little flexible, but don't push it because I really, need to make sure everybody gets their assignments on time. It's just fair for everybody else. Otherwise, for excused absences, of course, if it's a medical absence, then you can't tell me ahead of time, but tell me as soon as you're healthy. So, and then if it's something you know about, so like if it's a religious absence that you're anticipating, if it's a scheduled university sanctioned event, I need to know about it as soon as possible this semester. And this is just sort of a way to manage things so that I don't get a bunch of excused absence requests at the end of the semester. So as soon as possible, I need to know about it. Otherwise, I may not be able to give you the excuse. Other things, after you get a grade back, then you get 1 week after the return of the graded work. So if there might be a grading error, that happens. But again, I want to try to avoid having 90 students come to me to look for points in the last week of class. So once it gets back to you, the clock starts from the time you get that score. That's when the grade is. Academic integrity. So this is awkward, but there is an ASU rule that says that if you ask for a grade increase for reasons that have nothing to do with how the thing was scored, or in other words, the quality of your work, then I have to report that. So like if you say like, well, I know I only got a 70% on my midterm, but if I only got a 73, then my grade would go up a little bit and would really help me on this scholarship or something. Well, that has nothing to do with the course. So I would have to report that. So if you're asking for grade changes, then make sure they're about your grade and your performance and not about something that has nothing to do with the course. Otherwise, I'll distribute materials to you. Don't redistribute them. The stuff that I build is copyright me. The stuff that I get, others is copyright others, and I'm using under fair use or under those sorts of things. Of course, your own notes are copyright you, but ASU says it's academic integrity violation for you to sell or distribute your notes without permission from me. So don't do that unless it's a very special case of like, well, you're helping out someone else in the class who maybe has a note-taking issue or so on. Unapproved collaboration, most assignments are individual assignments, except for the ones that are, the stage 2 of the exam and the group project. Otherwise, work on your own. Of course, you can talk about the course. You can say, I don't really understand the difference between a signal and a cue. That's a great thing to talk to your neighbors or your other colleagues in the class. But if it's like, hey, I needed to generate an example of a signal for this assignment, can you come up with one that I can put in? Then that would be going too far. Okay. Yeah, the only other things to cover is the in-class kind of like the two different in-class exercises that we'll see a lot. So I will frequently throw these question slides up. And so I'm not paying attention to it right now, but if you're nervous about asking a question, you can always go to this links.asu.edu/bio331 questions and submit an anonymous question. And I or Anushka will be monitoring those during the class, and we'll try to handle these. And there's no ID there. When it says, do you want to register? You can just say, I don't want to register. And then you can just submit your question. And so I'll try to catch those during class. If they sneak by and are not captured during class, then I'll post an announcement or a discussion post afterwards trying to answer that question. So that's the one thing that will pop up frequently. And then the other thing are these iClicker based assessments. And so I'll usually remind you that if you have a laptop or even your mobile phone, you can go to student.iclicker.com. Otherwise, if you have a mobile phone, you can use the iClicker app. And I'll just ask a couple of iClicker questions during the lecture, and you just complete a certain number of them to get credit. Yeah. You don't have to do that right now, no. But if you, but I just put that there that if you haven't downloaded the iClicker app and you want to, then this will take you to that page that up there that will. Yeah. Well, on the previous slide, that QR code will just take you is an alternative to typing in that URL that will take you to the questions slide. All right. So that's how and then if and the worst comes to worst, if for some reason your device isn't working, but everybody else's is, then you can do a paper-based response. And so just write your ASU right in one corner, the last 4 digits of your ASU ID in the other corner, and then answer the questions, all of them on one sheet that are answered that day, and then just give it to me afterwards. I'd like to avoid this as much as possible and do the automated iClicker, but worst comes to worst, that's not awful. And then so closing remarks, check the syllabus. I'm not saying that in a snarky way, but I put a lot in the syllabus, and so a lot of the questions, honors contracts or whatever, are in the syllabus. And the more you check the syllabus, the more time it frees up for me to answer questions that are not in the syllabus. And otherwise, where to go next? Register with iClicker if you haven't. Complete all of those Unit 0 exercises to unlock the rest of the course. Start reading chapter 1 of the textbooks so you can have that in mind for next week. And look out for new assignments as I churn them out as we start driving through this course. So with that, that's all I got for you. Any questions? All right, then have a nice weekend, I guess. Huh? No, you don't. But if you had a question that you wanted to ask, you can ask it that way. Yeah, if you on Canvas down on the left here, see what says ASU Library Resource? Yeah, if you find that, then it will, once it comes up, the book will show up right there, and you can click on that book. You may have to click on the icon or over there, but you, or maybe you click on the full details or the view online. That should you click that view online link, and you should be able to get access to the textbook. That's right. Um, 1 second. Say it again. Oh well, I mean today, yeah,